Hello and welcome to an episode that deals with the film industry in India, its status, issues and problems. I am Suman Bajaj Kalra. In today's episode, we shall take a journey through the birth of Indian cinema, early experiments in India, the silent era, emergence of regional cinema and the main players, characters and directors of the golden age. We shall also look at Indian cinema through the ages, problems of the film industry, censorship, the role of the censor board and the film policy. Every attempt at truly appreciating and understanding an art has to begin with understanding its origin in the context of social and historical events that impact it. These factors contribute to the growth or the stifling of that artistic expression. That expression needs climate of freedom and concern. As well-known Hungarian film critic and writer Bela Belzas said, the question of educating the public to a better and more critical appreciation of films is a question of the mental health of a nation. The Indian film industry is one of the biggest in the world as it produces the largest number of films per year. It is beginning to draw attention globally from the stalwarts of cinema and the general public alike. Increasingly, some of the most talked about films are beginning to be shot here, often with the inclusion of Indian artists and crew members. Indian films are being produced with foreign markets in mind. Indian talent is beginning to be acknowledged across borders as it bags the most coveted awards one after the other. Stories set in India are drawing attention of big studios. India is the current flavor internationally. It is as if we are paying back to the world the debt we owed while borrowing the art and craft of cinema in the late 19th century. But it was not always like that. It has been a long and arduous journey spread over a span of over 100 years. In any country, the development and shape of an art form basically depends on four factors: the cultural and historical background of the country, enabling healthy existence of art forms like literature, music, spatial arts and theatre. Secondly, freedom of expression where the arts can partake of each other's richness. Thirdly, an encouraging government policy towards art forms that promotes cinema, ensures funding and has an exhibition platform helps it do well. But one that hinders is intolerant rigid censorship, heavy taxation, lack of infrastructure and so on. Lastly, development of technology. When we talk of Indian cinema, we have to consider the state of the nation in which it was born and the powerful national and international events and influences that shaped its character. In a short time, it emerged as a very powerful tool of social change and unification of the country. This happened despite the fact that the country was bound in foreign shackles and was backward and poor. But let's briefly go back to the birth of cinema outside India and its importance to our country. The seeds of film craft were sown in industrialized America. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that the advent of cinema itself was a gift of industrialization to the world. Thomas Edison installed kinetoscope for public viewing in New York on the 14th of April 1894. The film was 35 mm, all of 50 feet in length. Only one person could peep through that small machine. It was small but a historic first step in the invention of art form called cinema. It truly triggered a chain reaction, setting off a series of experiments in Western Europe and North America to better the machine. Art was to follow much later. The tremendous possibilities that the newer versions of the magical machine were to offer was gradually explored and experimented with. There was no tradition to fall back on or sustain. Each step brought cinema closer to what we know it as today. But these were small, unsteady but important steps. Almost 2 years of fierce experiments later, the Lumiere brothers held a screening of cinematograph in the basement of Grand Café in Paris on 28 December 1895. For the first time, people gathered there saw moving pictures on screen. Cinema was born, and within weeks it was carried for display to various countries like Germany, Italy, Russia, Hong Kong, Morocco and India. The excitement at this new invention was felt all across the world. In India, the mesmerizing screenings of Lumiere brothers films were held at Watson Hotel in Bombay. It took Bombay by storm. Word spread far and wide and people thronged to see the new spectacle. These were 20 minutes long screenings consisting of 10 films being shown 20 times a day. The shows had to be moved to the bigger novelty theatre and kept multiplying to satisfy the curiosity of the growing audience. From the very first show, the popularity of cinema was established beyond doubt. Intelligentsia saw it as a very powerful tool of expression, education and social change, and the public saw it as a very fascinating medium of entertainment. Funnily, the audience mostly consisted of men, as years of foreign rule and suppression had confined the female audience indoors. Besides, a few years down the line, the kind of foreign films that were being brought in were not deemed to be suitable for female or family audience. Educated and cultured sections of society looked at cinema with disdain and contempt. Such were the stories and their crass treatment in the films. The West was producing films only for mass entertainment and had no commitment to films as an art form or socio-historical document. Writing about this period in 1929, Eloisio de Vicente said, "For about 20 years, writers, men of letter, political and prominent men were ashamed to be seen in a cinematographic hall, considering it a shame and a deprivation compared to the theatre." Concerted film activity was going on in France, Italy and Russia. In fact, in sheer creative terms, these countries took a march over America. Europe was moving towards meaningful cinema and the skill of telling stories, while American cinema was indulging in escapist fare. In fact, during the First World War, America flooded India with Hollywood films. Commenting on the quality of these films, a bishop at a conference in England stated, "The majority of these films, which are chiefly from America, are of sensational and daring murders, crimes and divorces, and on the whole degrade the white woman in the eyes of the Indians." During the early period of these films from France, Italy, Russia, Germany and Denmark were also being shown here. Since it was the silent era, language posed no problem. These films were popular in the initial stages since India hardly produced any films of its own. Filmmaking was a closely guarded secret by Europeans and Americans. Indians found it very difficult to access the know-how. Those who had passion for cinema had to travel abroad to learn the craft surreptitiously. But the crassness of American films and culture gave impetus to Indian filmmakers to make that extra effort as a fitting retaliation with meaningful cinema. In India, film shows were being held in Calcutta and Madras in theatres and tents. In erstwhile Bombay, it was held in large playgrounds. The intellectual class of India, consisting of theatre writers, directors, musicians and authors, soon realized the power of cinema and jumped into the fray to experiment with this new medium. They made shorts showing real events and places like a Dhobi Ghat or a plant growing shot through single frame technique to be able to capture the growth. At this time, almost all the technicians were foreigners working on foreign equipment, as Indians had yet to learn the technology. With their help and guidance, Indian directors filmed extracts of famous plays or live events that attracted huge audiences. H.S. Bhattavdekar, better known as Sev Dada, who had brought a camera from England, filmed the return and the huge reception of R.P. Paranjpe at Chowpatty as he returned from Cambridge. He shot 2 more scenes of 3 minutes each in 1889. One was Do Pehlwanon Ki Kushti and Bandar Ka Nachta Hua Madari. Film shows were often part of stage entertainment consisting of music and drama. This was due to their short length of a few minutes and the absence of a story. The films were both foreign and Indian, but the technicians were almost always foreign. The long journey from the crude machines to the sophisticated cinema of today is a journey of exploring ideas, making them relevant to our society, honing the art of impactfully telling stories, and harnessing technology to suit the artistic needs of the medium. From 1896 onwards, there were several forays into filmmaking, but they just remained experiments with capturing real events like the arrival of a train at Churchgate Station, Pune horse races, and so on. In 1901, Hiralal Sen, in what was known as Calcutta, filmed excerpts of mythological stage dramas and showed them as films during stage shows. These experiments continued until 1904. Several filmmakers emerged on the scene. Manik D. Setna started the touring cinema company in Bombay, showing the life of Christ, a two-reeler. Swami Kannu Vincent, a draftsman from the railways, acquired a projector and film from a visiting Frenchman and set up a touring cinema going around small towns and villages in the south of India. India had woken up to the magic of cinema even though it was still without sound. In 1902, J.F. Madan bought film equipment from a French company and held a biscope show in the central Maidan of Calcutta. He turned producer in 1905 with Jyotish Sarkar's film of a protest rally against partition of Bengal. Madan saw big business potential in cinema and launched a large production company which made its presence felt in India and overseas. In fact, he became producer, distributor, exhibitor in Indian, Burmese and Ceylonese territory to take full advantage of its business potential. He even imported leading actresses to play heroines in Indian mythological films, since Indian women were not allowed to even see films, leave alone act in them. In fact, the female roles were being enacted by men dressed as women. (1889 to 1930). Since the sound technology for films had not been invented, the story was conveyed with the help of captions wherever necessary. Music and effects were played by live bands which played in the theatre at appropriate junctures in the film to enhance the dramatic impact of the story. In 1912, R.G. Tony made a film called Pundalik that was a story from Mahabharata. It turned out to be a failed experiment as the film was never released commercially in theatres. The rapid growth of the medium began in 1913 when the first successful feature-length film, though it was silent, was made in India. Around 1910, the great painter, Sanskrit scholar, photographer, printer and magician Dadasaheb Phalke gave up everything to engage with cinema. He spent 2 years reading up all the foreign books and journals on cinema, camera, projection and lighting. Not satisfied, he went to Europe to learn more and buy equipment for production of a film. The production began in 1912. In May 1913, the first Indian feature film, Raja Harishchandra, had a triumphant screening at the Coronation Theatre in Bombay. It was history in the making, and the first chapter of the glorious story of Indian film industry had been written. India was struggling to gain freedom from British rule. It made sense to pick up a popular story from Mahabharata, which had often been performed on stage even as folk theatre. Besides, the times demanded that cinema contribute towards arousing national pride in one's culture, ideals and history. The film also went to Colombo and Rangoon, since Mahabharata was popular there too. The power of cinema was truly discovered and established. This was the tool badly needed to spread the message of freedom and uniting people to fight against foreign rule. While Hollywood films of that time exploited women by invariably showing them as nightclub dancers and women of loose characters, Indian films took the audience through patriotic and spiritual journeys. The themes were either mythological or social. Stories from the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata were most popular. The films also often depicted the misery of the life lived in subjugated India, but with high moral values. Indian filmmakers continued to learn the technique from the Hollywood and Europe, but the stories were Indian. It was a double-edged sword. The themes served the purpose of evoking nationalism while running down the crudity of foreign culture. It was mass cinema mixed with moral education, just the right alchemy to boost the freedom struggle. Films had begun to be produced in Madras in the south and Calcutta in the east. In 1913, 27 films were made in Hindi, Bengali, Tamil and Telugu. Let us look at some production figures that show how popular films had become in India in the early 20th century. 1917, productions of feature film in the south, Kichika Vadham and others. 1920, 18 feature films produced in India. 1921, 40 feature films produced in India. 1925, 80 feature films produced in India. Films pervaded India everywhere as they travelled all across urban and rural India as shows were being taken from village to village and city to city. Most of the films were being produced in Bombay. There were many reasons for this. It had a rich tradition of theatre, folk and classical, music, literature and performing arts. It had a highly appreciative and forward-looking audience with money to spend on entertainment. Being the commercial capital of the country, it could financially support cinema. Foreign films were freely imported through sea route and it helped educate the early filmmakers. It had the largest number of rich private entrepreneurs. It had the availability of large amounts of black money which went into film production. In fact, black money largely supported the film industry for decades until the government tried to regularize its economy by giving it industry status. Though the Hindi film industry was largely based in Bombay, regional language films were also being made in smaller numbers in Marathi, Bengali, Tamil, Telugu and Gujarati. And there was no looking back as the next revolutionary technological advancement was round the corner. The days of the live band playing with the film screening had come to an end by the beginning of the 1930s. Abdul Ali Yusuf Ali, one of the most flamboyant film personalities of India, had spread his film exhibition empire from India to Singapore, Sumatra, Burma and Ceylon from 1901 to 1904. In 1918, he joined hands with filmmaker Ardashir Irani and built Majestic Theatre, where the latter's film and the first talkie of the country, Alam Ara, was shown. In the early 30s, the silent Indian cinema began to talk, sing and dance. Alam Ara, produced by Ardashir Irani of the Imperial Company, released on March 14, 1931. It was the first Indian film with soundtrack. Films, even though highly dramatic, began to infuse realism by introduction of sound. The film starred Prithviraj Kapoor, Zubeda, Master Vittal and Zillo. The film had 7 songs. The next film, Shiri Farhad by J. J. Madan of Calcutta, beat it with 18 songs. Madan broke all records in Indra Sabha, which had 69 songs featuring Jahan Ara and Master Nisar. Mumbai became the hub of the Indian film industry, having a number of self-contained production units. The 30s saw hits like Madhuri in 1932, Indira M.A. in 1934, Anarkali 1935, Miss Frontier Mail 1936 and Punjab Mail 1939. By late 30s and early 40s, India had evolved its own language of cinema and had fully comprehended its power on the minds of the masses. It was beginning to look for its own idiom rather than ape the West. With the advent of sound, the rich classical and folk tradition of Indian music began to play an important role in Indian cinema. Music became a big draw and one of the most important components of the Indian film. Thematically, the new generation of filmmakers began to explore new subjects which emerged from the Indian society and its ethos. Some of the foreign influences were still evident in films like Fearless Nadia, made in 1936, Miss Frontier Mail again in 1936, Hunter Wali Ki Beti in 1943 and Diamond Queen in 1940. In fact, this trend could be seen even as late as 1949 in films like Andaz and Shri 420, made in 1955. The characters played by Nargis and Nadira respectively with Ilan. Both the characters display a marked influence of English language, dress, culture, lifestyle and outlook. Same is the case of one of the prominent characters of Guru Dutt's film, Kagaz Ke Phool. However, this is not to say that the Indian cinema was portraying alien themes. On the contrary, Indian films were extremely sensitive to the melee of Indian culture and social mores, which were partial to upper castes and the elite of society. There were issues of oppression of the poorer classes, unemployment, poverty, landless peasants, illiteracy and suppression of women. Films dealt with all of them. Eminent filmmaker V. Shantaram, in his 1936 film Amrit Manthan, attacked religious bigotry. Devdas, made by P.C. Barua in 1935, took a critical look at the class system amongst the upper castes. V. Shantaram's Duniya Na Mane and Jagirdar, both in 1937, dealt with social backwardness and landlords' atrocities respectively. Madan Theatres of Calcutta produced Shiri Farhad and Laila Majnu in 1931. It was well composed and recorded musicals. Both the films were replete with songs and had a tremendous impact on the audience. It can be said to have established the unshakable hold of songs on our films. Chandidas, a Bengali film produced in 1932, was the story of a Vaishnavite poet, priest, who falls in love with a low-cost washerwoman and defies convention. It was a super hit. P.C. Barua produced Devdas in 1935 based on Sarat Chandra Chatterjee's famous story about frustrated love. It influenced a generation of viewers and filmmakers. Tamil films emerged as a veritable entertainment industry in 1929 with the creation of General Pictures Corporation in what was then known as Madras. Most of the Tamil films produced were multilingual productions with versions in Telugu, Malayalam and Kannada until film production units were established in Hyderabad, Trivandrum and Bangalore. The first talkie of South India, Srinivas Kalyanam, was made by A. Narayanan in 1934. That is all in this episode on Indian cinema today. We talked about the history of cinema, the early beginnings of cinema in India, the silent era and the advent of talkies. I hope that you have understood and enjoyed the episode. We will continue this episode in our next session. We will see you soon. Goodbye and best of luck.